And so
Right.
actually in Israel, they began saying it on the 7th of Cheshvan. That makes good sense. But then once the community was centered in Bavel in Babylonia, they said that those not living in Israel should base it on the Babylonian rain season. And
Mhm.
that's what it was for many years until the, I want to, not the Gregorian calendar, but what was the
Mhm.
Julian calendar, the one before the Gregorian? Sounds
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Julius Caesar. Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's that one when they realized that they had lost 13 days due to the sun not, the cycle not being exactly 365
Mhm.
days. So on
Mhm.
that one year, the day on which to say V'tein Talamar Tali Bracha was December 4th, and somehow December 4th got codified as the date, even though it was only a one-time need, even according to right for however they were calculating it. Um, so it's a curiosity, and then there's interesting questions also because for people like us who live in climates where it rains all year round, why are we limiting ourselves to when there's a
Mhm.
need for rain in Israel or Iraq or Iran? Um, so there's interesting discussions about it. But
Mhm.
anyway, Gary and I always had conversations. I don't want to say high level because I didn't really. What I just told you is the best that my understanding goes on this stuff. But anyway, tomorrow night we should
Mm.
all start remember
Oh,
that and
thank
start
you.
saying it. And I will certainly be thinking of Gary when I say it for the first time also.
Ah,
Um,
Mhm.
and
oh, sweet. Mm.
with
Of course.
that, let's get to Parshat Vayetze. Can everyone see my? Oh no, I need to hit share. Okay. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Is it
Yes.
zoomed in enough? I
Uh,
started really big
yeah, I
today,
think so.
but if the answers always go one
I think you
more,
should
right?
zoom in one more and then zoom out once.
Okay, there we
And then
go.
it'd be perfect.
All right. We'll leave
That's
it there
fine. Yeah, that's
for
all.
now. Okay. So we're in Parshat Vayetze. Remember the very end of last week's Parsha was the drama of, and we spoke about this in last week's Shir, with Yitzchak going blind and Yaakov disguising himself as Esav and taking the bracha. And when Esav gets wind of what happens, he gets very upset and he
I could turn it on my
makes a
earpod.
resolution. It's unclear if it's
Cannot.
if he says anything or he just thinks it, but he decides that the proper response is that he's going to kill Yaakov. And so Parshat Vayetze basically picks up where that left off with Yaakov on the run. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba. He leaves Beersheba. He goes to Haran to his relatives. We know on the
Amazing
way
computer.
he has his dream with the angels on the ladder.
Work.
Um, and once he gets there, he sees Rachel, who is his cousin, and falls in love with her. Eventually, is able to marry her with an unintended marriage in between, with when he marries Leah. Um, and then we have the birth of Yaakov's children of the Shvatim. So it's a really important, rich parsha. Before we get actually into anything in our parsha, I just wanted to note that in my summary we missed an important piece of Yaakov's going to Haran. So we think that he goes to Haran because he has to escape Esav, and that's true. So we see that in source number one. Um, this is why I was a little
Yeah.
vague as to what how Esav made known, or if he made known his intention to kill Yaakov, and how, right? It's also an interesting thought, just how literal was it, right? Was it really, I'm going to kill him and Yaakov better run away, or was it sort of like someone does something to us and we say, I'm going to kill him, I'm going to kill him? We know no one really means they're going to kill them. It means you're upset. and in 2 minutes you'll forget all about it. But anyway, we read in source number 1. This is the end of last week's parsha. Vayugad l'Rivka divrei Esav bena hagadol, ותשלח ותקרא ליעקב בנה הקטן, ותאמר אליו, הנה עשיו אחיך מתנחם לך להרגך. So Rivka finds out about Esav's words or his intention or his thoughts of saying he wants to kill Yaakov. And she says to Yaakov, Esav is very upset at you. He wants to kill you. Ata b'ni shema b'koli v'kum barach lach el Lavan achi Harana. So therefore, my son, listen, run away to my brother Lavan who lives in Haran. Yashafti mo yamim achadim ad asher tashuv chamat achicha. You'll live with him, you'll stay with him for a little while until Esav calms down. Ad shuv af achicha mimcha v'shachach et asher asita lo v'shalachti l'ukachtichacha misham lama eshkol gam shnechem yom echad. Right, until his anger subsides. And then I will send for you, and you can come back. Why should I lose two children in one day? So first of all, what does it mean that she loses 2 children? She never loses Esav, right? Even if Esav does harm, maybe she means she, whatever. So we're not going to focus on this, but all
That's
this
a
is
good
to show
question.
that, yeah. But all this is to show that, right? Yaakov certainly is going to Haran in order to escape Esav. But then we read a little bit further on, still in last week's parsha, Vayikra Yitzchak el Yaakov. Sorry, here's the source number 2. Vayivarecho tov yitzaveu vayomer lo tikach isha mibnot Canaan. Now Yitzchak calls Yaakov and blesses him, and he says, "Do not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Hum lech padena aram beta betuel avi imecha v'kach lecha misham isha mibnot Lavan achi imecha." Go run away to the home of Betuel, your grandfather, your mother's father, and from there you'll take a wife from the daughters of Lavan, her brother, your uncle. And God will bless you. And he'll give you the blessing of Abraham, etc., etc. So there's a second purpose in Yaakov's running to Haran, right? Yeah, he's going to escape Esau. He's also going to find himself a wife, right? And this has parallels to Yitzchak, who he doesn't go, the servant goes on his behalf, but also goes far away in order to find a wife, a spouse. It's not clearly laid out with the beginning, but find a spouse from the family, and from Abraham's original home. So there's 2 purposes in Yaakov's going to Haran. He's going to escape Esau, but he's also going to find a wife. And surprise, not only does he find one wife, but he's really firm in his mission, because he winds up with at least 4 wives, right? So he takes that mission very seriously. Okay, so that's the intro. Yeah.
Just before we jump in, just like the last pasuk in Perchav Zayin is that Rivka tells Yitzchak, "Katzli b'chayai mipnei benot chet."
Right.
Right. So she kind of puts the thought into his head.
Right,
That's the escape plan.
And that was also right. Right, she puts the escape plan, but or that he should go there. But right, remember before the whole blindness and trickery of last week's Parsha drama that we've looked at, right? We saw that Esav had married 2 local girls, and that caused great distress to the parents. So there's okay. So we fought now we're in Haran. Yaakov is running away. He has his dream. However, I think we spent that was the topic of our shir 2 years ago, maybe. He has the dream with the angels. He goes, he encounters the shepherds at the well. He asks them, "Do you know Betuel? Do you know Lavan?" "Yes, we know him." Blah, blah, blah. Okay, he's in the right spot. And we then read in source number 3, Odenu midaber imam Rachel ba'a imatzon asher laviha kiro'ahi. He's still speaking with them, and Rachel comes with the sheep of her father, for she was a shepherdess. Vahi kasher ra'a Yaakov et Rachel bat Lavan achi imo ve'et son Lavan achi imo. Vayigash Yaakov vayagel et ha'aven me'al pi ha'be'er. Vayashk et son Lavan achi imo. When Yaakov sees Rachel, his cousin or the daughter of his mother's brother, and the sheep, he by himself rolls the stone off of the well, and he waters the sheep. Vayishak Yaakov leRachel, vayisad kolo vayef. He kisses Rachel and he cries. Vayagid Yaakov leRachel ki achi avihahu, v'chi ben Rivkahu vataratz vatagi la'avia. Yaakov tells her who he is, and she goes and tells her father. Okay, so it's a really powerful description of what's going on here. And if we have to describe it, how would we describe what's going through Yaakov's head? Well, what is this? So it seems like it's a very romantic encounter, right? He's obviously smitten in love with her, right? It gives him superhuman strength that he's able to roll off this stone that all the local shepherds needed the entire team to move. He does it by himself. He has this burst of power of energy, um, and he seems to be very much in love or infatuated with Rachel the first time he sees her. And then a few psukim later, we read that Yaakov stays with Lavan, and Lavan um, wants to offer him some sort of payments or some way of compensating him. So Vayomer Lavan leYaakov achi ata va'avadatani chinam hagida li ma maskortech. He says, "You're my family. You shouldn't be working for free. What do you want for your salary?" Ulalavan shtei vanot, Shem hagdola Leah, v'Shem hagtana Rachel. Lavan had two daughters. The older one was Leah. The younger one was Rachel. Ve'enei Leah rakot. Rachel hayta yafat toar v'yafat mareh. Leah's eyes were rakot. We'll come back to that phrase. For now, we'll translate it as soft, dim. Dim. I think soft. I think soft is probably the most accurate. And Rachel was beautiful of appearance. Yifat, right? Yifat Tzor, Yifat Mareh. She was beautiful. Vayehav Yaakov et Rachel. Vayomer evdecha sheva shanim berachel bitcha haktana. Yaakov loves Rachel, and he says, "I will work 7 years in order that I can marry Rachel, your younger daughter." Vayomer Lavan tov titi ota lach mititi ota leish acher shva imadi. Lavan says, "Better you than someone else." Right? Really cutting away from the romance of the whole thing. Sure, why not? Better that she marries you than marry anyone else, so you can stay, and that's our deal. Vayavod Yaakov berachel sheva shanim, vayu be'inav kayamim achadim ba'avato ota. Yaakov works for Rachel for 7 years, and they were like few in days because of his great love for her. Okay, so we have this description of the two sisters. It's not
Rabbi,
exact.
I'm sorry, the
Yeah.
fact that they're cousins, did that not have any negative effect?
Did it have any negative effect? I mean, halachically, it's permitted, right? Cousins are allowed to marry each other. There's no halachic issue with it. We don't read of there being any negative effects as far as genetics, from close relatives marrying. Um, Many assume that with all these wives, and that there were more than 12 children. 13. We read of 13 because Dinah also. Many assume that there were more children, and we only read of these ones. It could be, but we don't know. But
Well,
and
it's
again,
better than marrying your sibling, right?
it's better than marrying your sibling. That's true.
Which
And
Avram
again,
apparently had done.
which Avram may or may not have done. But it's this at least this was common. This was common practice, not necessarily advisable practice, but common practice. And so we don't read of any ill effects of the close relationship on the children. Okay, so we have this description of the two sisters, Enele Arakot,
He said it's
Rachel Haita Yefat Torah Yefat Mar'eh, Leah's eyes were soft, and Rachel was of beautiful appearance. So what does it mean that Enele Arakot, that Leah's eyes were soft? The Rashbam says, Naot, I don't know what that word is supposed to be. Varsh Bilaz, I have no idea. That they were beautiful. If a bride, if a woman, if a possible shidduch has beautiful eyes, so then you don't need to worry about any blemishes in the rest of the body. The eyes is the most important um, physical trait for the Rashbam. Okay, so she had beautiful eyes, and that's all that mattered. And so, right, so according to the Rashbam, the two sisters were really on equal footing, or maybe even Leah was more beautiful, right? If she has beautiful eyes, and that's the most important characteristic, so the fact that Rachel had other beautiful physical traits, maybe she was not considered as beautiful from whatever standards either the Rashbam or Yaakov was working on. But the Ralbag says, Hine hayula lavan shtei banot, v'lo bachar Yaakov bigdola, lefi she'eineha hayu rakot v'dumot v'hu choli ma. The Ralbag understands that this description of her eyes being soft really is they were weak, or they were somehow tarnished, and that it was a sign of an illness, whether it was an illness that affected her entire body or specifically an illness in the eyes, but it was a sign of illness. Bachar baktana kedei sheya hazera sheya lo mimena yoter bari v'yoter shalom mitzuraf lazeh shehi yefat torah v'yefat mareh. So he chose Rachel according to the Ralbag because, to Gwen's point, not of the genetic concern, but he didn't want his children to get this illness that Leah had. He wanted them to be healthy and fit, and so he prefers the sister that it seems to be more healthy and more fit. And that's according to the Ralbag why the Torah gives us that description. Rav Hirsch says, instead of saying Leah was not so beautiful, right? It says Rachel was beautiful and Leah had soft eyes. It says that it just praises her good points. Her eyes were soft and tender, whereas Rachel was altogether beautiful. So according to Rav Hirsch, Leah had nice eyes, and that was it. Okay, so again, it seems a little, I don't know, it's a little uncomfortable for me reading, thinking about the Avos choosing their wife based on these only physical traits, and also the focus on physical beauty, where we know that that's obviously important, but far from the most important trait in choosing one's spouse. But anyway, this is what Rav Hirsch says. And then finally, Nachum Sarna says, weak eyes, not poor vision, but lacking in luster. So there was no sparkle. There was nothing that caught the attention. It was, she was vanilla, I guess is how Nachum Sarna would say it. Then we read Rashi. Say again?
No, I'll come up again.
Okay. So then we see Rashi, Rakot, Shaitas Furala Alot Begoralo Shel Esav Ubocha. Rashi says that her eyes were, I guess he would say red. They were red with tears. As he says, Leah was constantly crying. Why? Because she thought she was destined to marry Esav. Lavan has 2 daughters. Rachel has 2 sons. Again, the common practice seems to be that cousins wed each other, right? Everyone stays within the family. So it makes sense that the older daughter goes to the older son. And so Leah thought she was destined to marry Esav. And so she was crying because she didn't want to marry Esav. She knew that Esav wasn't such a good guy. Again, how do we know Esav wasn't such a good guy? Was he really not such a good guy? Let's assume that was at least what Leah thought of him. And so she was crying because, and that's why her eyes looked to be to be this way. And so whichever approach we take, that contributes to Yaakov's showing preference for Rachel over Leah. It's really, let's skip ahead for a second because I thought this was a really interesting
Let me
point.
make one point.
Yeah,
We
please.
have a dog.
Yes.
We have a dog. It's called a English Shepherd.
Okay.
It's a shepherd dog. It looks just like a border collie,
Yeah.
except there's differences. And one is that the border collie pierces with its eyes to the sheep, whereas our dog has, quote, soft eyes.
Okay.
That's the expression they use, yeah.
They
Yeah.
use that for describing the dog.
Interesting.
That's all.
Okay. Okay. It's interesting because think of our description of Leah as a Nelea Rakot. Maybe I should hold this to later in this year, but what the heck, we'll go for it now. We have, right, later on in Jewish history, a very interesting description of Rachel in Sefer Yirmiyahu, and right, I'm sure many of us know various songs, various tunes that these verses are set to. Kor Amar Hashem, Kol B'Rama Nishma, Nehi B'chi Tamurim, Rachel Mivaka Al Baneha Me'ana Lihinachim Al Baneha Ki. Thus says Hashem, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. So in Jewish history, ironically, perhaps, it's Rachel who becomes associated with tears, with crying. And it's the crying of Rachel is seen as something quite praiseworthy, right? She's crying over the Jews being exiled, right? And we know Rachel is not buried with the rest of the Avot and Imahot. She's buried in, right, on the way, on the road in Kever Rachel in Beit Lechem. And so, but her tears are seen as the ultimate sign of compassion of the tragedy of the exile and of the ultimate hope that and promise that the Jews will be returned. And so it's an ironic twist that it's Rachel who ultimately becomes associated with the tears that are first connected with Leah. Okay, moving along in our study of the two sisters. Okay, so we know that just as Yaakov tricked Yitzchak into getting the bracha that was intended for Esav, or that's the simplest read of what happened, Yaakov then is tricked and duped by Lavan into marrying Leah instead of Rachel. And so Yaakov gets very upset, and Lavan agrees. Well, he says it's not the proper way to for the younger daughter to get married before the older daughter. So if you agree to work for another 7 years, you can marry Rachel also, as we had originally planned. And it doesn't mean, according to almost everyone, that Yaakov had to wait 7 years to marry Rachel, but it means that he had to pledge himself to work an additional 7 years. But most assume he married Rachel soon after the marriage to Leah. Some say even as soon as 7 days afterwards. But that he commits to working for another 7 years. But interestingly, when Yaakov does marry Rachel, and it is really Rachel this time, the Torah tells us in source number 10, Vayavo gam el Rachel, Vayehav gam et Rachel meleah. Vayavod imo od sheva shanim acherot. He came, he slept, he cohabited with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel also, right? That the translation here is not literal. The literal translation would be also, gam. Vayehav gam et Rachel meleah. He also loved Rachel more than Leah. Vayavod imo od sheva shanim acherot, and he works for another 7 years. Um,
Hmm.
so the question is, what does it mean, Gam? Well, why does the Torah tell us he also loved Rachel? So one school of thought, we'll just look at the Ramban. I think he's a little bit more, uh, spells it out a little bit more than the Chizkuni, but they basically say the same thing. Vayehov Gam et Rachel, Hiskir Hakatuv Shegam Ahav Rachel Yoter Melea. That the Torah tells us that he also loves Rachel more than Leah. Hatam Bavor Ki Ateva Lehov Yoter Isha Asher Yada Hadam Barishona. He says normally, right, in the normal course of nature, a man will love the woman with whom he is with first. Kinyan shizku chachamim banashim, ina koretet brit elel mish asa kli, right? And so in the reverse, the rabbis have a saying that a woman forms a stronger bond with her first husband, her first lover. Kine Yaakov ahav Rachel milea shelo kederech eretz, right? V'zetam gam. But he's telling us that Yaakov loved loved Rachel, even though we would have expected otherwise, right? Not like most people who would form a stronger bond with the first wife, even if they thought they loved the second sister more, right? Once the deed is done, once they're together, most people would form a stronger bond with the first wife rather than the second wife. But so the word gam emphasizes that with Yaakov that wasn't the case. But then Rabbi Alex Israel um, has an interesting insight on this. He says that she is the second, right? Which the Ramban says she's the second, but the Ramban and the Chizkuni say even though she's the second, Yaakov still loves her. Rabbi Israel wanted to read it as their special moment together has been tarnished. Instead of the climactic culmination of their love, their togetherness contains elements of frustration and disappointment. Right? Gam. Even right, it's a less than ideal love. It started out as this great romantic um, passionate connection that they had, at least that Yaakov felt for her. We don't know if it was reciprocated by Rachel. That's another interesting question. But but now that Lavan and Leah sort of interfered, the plan is ruined, and it's not quite at the same level as it once was. That's how he wants to read it, and we'll keep
Rabbi,
that. Yeah.
if a man is married and his wife passes away and he marries someone else, remarries,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that his attachment, his love is for his first wife, even if the second wife is still living for the rest of his life.
I mean, I imagine that's true for some people, and it's probably not true for other people. I don't know. It's very difficult to make these broad statements in matters of love in the heart, right? It's very hard to say that. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But it's definitely possible. But we'll just look at what the commentators say, and everyone can draw their own conclusions. I don't want to make any broad statements about that. But if we go back to the parts of the passage we were looking at, after we're told that Yaakov also loves Rachel, the Torah then tells us, "Vayar Hashem ki snu'a Leah, vayftach et rachma v'Rachel akara." God sees that Leah is snu'a. Okay, so
Hated.
yeah,
It's a very kind translation.
yes, it's a very kind translation. Literally, right, snua means hated. We snow means to hate. And so, what does it mean that that Leah was snua, right? And the Torah seems to be telling us that because God saw that she was hated, so therefore God has, I guess, Rahmanas on her more, and she becomes the first one to bear children. So one school of thought here takes it like the JPS translation and says Snua doesn't really mean he hated her, but we'll just go to the English Nachum Sarna, unloved. The term has socio-legal implications in additional to emotional dimension, it expresses not hatred as opposed to beloved so much as a relative degree of preference. Maybe that was too much of a tongue twister in English, and we should have stuck with the with the classical commentators. But right, he says it doesn't mean that she was hated. It means that she was less loved. She was not the favorite. Um, but that it was just it was relative to Rachel that she was not as loved, but not doesn't mean God right that she was hated. The Ramban says no. We should translate it literally. Ramban says Ki snu'a Leah, hine Leah rimta b'achota gam b'Yakov. Well, Yaakov has good reason to hate Leah, be angry with her. Right? She tricked him. Ki imno marsha nahaga kavod bavia shachaz b'v'nichisa elav al tamerbo hayala lagidlo olirmos ki hileya. Right? So if we can say that her father forced her into this secret plan, she should have somehow let Yaakov know that this was not her doing, or that he wasn't really with the sister, with the wife he thought he was with. If the only reason she was doing it was because her father forced her. But if we but she didn't say anything.
Rachel
You have to assume,
collaborated in this stuff.
yeah. Oh, so that's a different medrash, right? That Rachel, right? There is a very famous medrash that says Rachel and Yaakov were suspicious that Lavan might be up to tricks, and so they had some code or some secret way that they concocted to make sure that they were them. And then Rachel got concerned that Leah would be so embarrassed when Yaakov finds out that she shared the message with the signs with Leah as an act of Rahmanus. Yeah, so that's a different midrashic take. But right, for the Ramban and the Pshat, Leah doesn't say anything. She knows what she's doing, and so Yaakov has good reason to be angry with her and even to hate her. V'afki ha'tamid nakeret kol halayla fichach lo ikira ad sharav b'boker, right? V'lachin snei Yaakov, and this is why Yaakov hates her. Then the Ramban says, well, we can understand, and he tries to justify Leah's actions because all she really wanted was to be married to such a tzaddik like Yaakov, so she bent the rules. She acted very un-tzaddik-like in order to be with the tzaddik. And so the Ramban says, I can understand that. And then we can see that seems to be the pshat if you just look at the names that Leah gives to her children, right? And we've spoken about this in the past also.
I can call you later, okay?
Vayar kis, okay. Vatar Leah vatelet ben vatikra shmo Reuven. The first child is named Reuven. Ki amra ki ra'ah Hashem be'oni. Ki ata yehavani ishi. She said, God sees that, has seen my affliction, and now my husband will love me. Well, doesn't seem to have worked because Vatar od vatelet ben vatomer ki shama Hashem kisnu anochi vaitin li gam etzeh. So the second child, she says, God heard that I am hated, and so therefore God gave me a second son, Vatikra shmo Shimon. And so the name Shimon, Simon, comes from God hearing that Leah is hated. Vatahar od vateled ben, vatomer hapan yilaveh ishi elai ki yaladeti lo shlosha banim. The third child is called Levi because she says, now my husband will become attached to me because I've borne for him 3 children. And then something changes with number 4, and it's unclear what changes. But number 4, Tar od vateled ben vatomer apam odet Hashem al ken kara shemo Yehuda vatamod miledet. She has a 4th child, and she says, now I can thank God for my children, and she calls his name Yehuda. And then she stops bearing children for a little bit. So we could say that she has a change of perspective, and she no longer, or that Yaakov has a change of perspective, or that Yaakov's hands are forced. And even if he did have these negative attitudes, once there's 4 children, there was no time for the hatred or the animosity to play out. They were too busy with changing diapers and going to the doctor and dropping off at school and everything, or that a stronger bond was forged through the children. Or maybe we might read it as Leah accepts her lot. I'll never be the favored wife. I'll never be the loved or more loved or most loved wife, but I can be thankful for these beautiful children that I have. And even if it's not an ideal marriage, so be it. And she comes to terms with what had previously frustrated her. I think both are equally compelling ways of understanding that progression and the giving of the names. Okay, so now I wanted to so this was all just sort of painting a background of the picture and the dynamic that existed in the home. And I wanted to conclude with three interesting sources. Yeah, we'll go to the Bereshit Rabbah, the Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash tells us, just see, we're getting a little bit late in time. Yeah, let's do the whole thing. Lavan shtei vanot. Lavan had two daughters. Kishtei korot mefushalot besof olam ve'ad sofo, like two beams that reach from one end of the world to the other. Zeu hamida alufim ve'zo hamida alufim. So this one gave birth or had children who became chieftains, and this one had children who were chieftains. Zohamida Malachim, Zohamida Malachim, each one gave birth or had descendants who became kings. Mizo Amdu Hargei Ariot, Mizo Amdu Hargei Ariot. From this one, there were brave soldiers who killed lions, and from this one were brave soldiers who killed lions. Mizo Amdu Nevi'im, Mizo Amdu Nevi'im. Each one gave, had descendants who became prophets. Mizu Amdu Mechalkei Arsot. Okay. It tells us that each one of them had descendants who were really remarkable and who had great traits, and so they seem to be on equal footing. So then the Medrash picks up and it says, third line from the bottom. I think the English is down here. Okay, the name of the elder Hagdolah, Shem Hagdolah Leah. The name of the older one was Leah. Gidolah b'matnoteha, kihuna leolam umalchut leolam. So Leah was Gidolah, but we might read Gidolah as greater. Not that she was older, but she was greater. How is she greater? Greater in her gifts, because her descendants were eternal priesthood and eternal kingship. Right? Who are the descendants of Leah? Is Shevet Levi, is the tribe of Levi, who became the Kohanim and Leviim, and Yehuda, right? Lo Yasor Shevet Mi Yehuda. David, the David dynasty, comes from Shevet Yehuda, who's Leah's children. Uchtiv, okay. V'shem Haktana Leah, Ktana b'matnoteha. So the name of the younger one, or here it's being read as the lesser one, was Rachel. How is Rachel lesser? Yosef l'sha'a, Shaul l'sha'a, v'Shilo l'sha'a. So every position of leadership and authority that were assumed from the descendants of Rachel were only temporary. Yosef was a temporary in charge in Egypt, but that didn't last very long. Shaul was the first king from Shevet Binyamin, but again, he didn't pass it on to his children. Shiloh was the site of the first, where the Mishkan was first placed, but that didn't last. And so Rachel was more temporary, or was lesser. And so it's quite interesting because we begin with this picture of Rachel as being the favorite, of being the one who's, Yaakov's preferred wife, the one who has the great romance, the one whose marriage we would think would be the healthier, the stronger. And in the end, the Medrash is telling us that Rachel was not as great as Leah. And so maybe it's a poetic justice and it's retribution for Yaakov not treating Leah properly, but it's quite interesting.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
There's one other
explanation for those two words, and it comes from the Midrash, but by way also later in the Kabbalah, that Leah's name is represented by the first Hey in Hashem's name,
Okay.
and the second one is Rachel, and hers is the last Hey. And so
Where's the
there
Hey in
is
Rachel?
right, the one of them is more involved with things that are more transcendent. So Leah is connected with eternity in a special way, but also with the attribute of understanding, Bina, which gives birth to seven, and she had seven children.
Okay.
And then Leah and Rachel is connected with Malchus, the last and the most embracing, and the one that brings about constant new worlds, is Rachel. So both of them have very important roles, actually, because Rachel is the one that we identify so much with the exile. I know you're going to come back around to something about Leah too in that regard, but one generation after another, temporary generation after another one, would fit into that earlier idea that you expressed. I think it rounds out the picture a little bit more. The reason I like it myself is because later on in the story, which you don't have a chance to get to right here, after Rachel dies, and then eventually Leah dies. And when she does, Yaakov, really, that is the point at which he begins to really complain a lot and be very depressed and very upset. So I think Leah helped to provide, over his lifetime, a sense of stability within his emotions. And when she was gone, he noticed it. That's something I just wanted to add in.
Okay. Okay. I think that segues nicely to the next source I wanted to look at, which is from Rabbi Steinsaltz, source number 25. So he says as follows. Fundamentally, we have here two kinds of love in all their complexity. A romantic love that draws its sustenance from longing, from separation and distance, from premature death. A love full of expectation, dreams, and memories. That, of course, is the love of Yaakov and Rachel. On the other hand, we have the love of a faithful woman, the woman who remains beside her husband, works and struggles in the daily round with him, bears him most of his children, and whose love and is constant, stable, and real. Leah's relationship was without the drama, the elation, and the dejection that characterized his love for Rachel. In a sense, she was the romantic. Leah, the mature and faithful wife. And so, what Rabbi Steinsaltz is suggesting, and this was really spelled out by Rabbi Israel, I didn't give full credit. I gave the one of the sources has a link to his article, but I also, as I said last week in the many hours sitting in Thanksgiving traffic, I heard a wonderful podcast where he sort of spelled out these ideas. It was the Matan Parsha podcast, which is pretty good. I've enjoyed listening to that one. It's hosted by Dr. Josefa Fogel. Anyway, you can find it if you're into the podcasts, Matan, and so this is where I heard it. And so the way that Rabbi Israel spells it out is that we have really two paradigms here. We have, right, the Rachel paradigm is the paradigm of romance and intense emotions, which we understand are very important, but we also understand that if a relationship built only on those characteristics is doomed to fail, that eventually the passion will die out or the passion will subside. And if you can't find a way to keep the relationship strong when the passion subsides, so that's a sign that it's doomed. And Leah is not necessarily the model of romance and intense passion that we like to think about when we think about spouses and what the ideal relationship should look like, but that there is something quite valuable and quite enduring about this more, I guess we'll call it practical love. That she's there, she is helping with the kids, and she remains as Anne said, a sort of calming presence in Yaakov's life. And so obviously what he says, maybe it's not obvious, is we need to find a way to combine the two, that we, of course, in our relationships need the passion, but we need to be able to move beyond the passion and to move to something more deep and sustaining and enduring. And that's what he sees as being embodied in these two types of love that are described between Yaakov and Leah and Yaakov and Rachel. Just interesting to note, I forgot to mention it earlier, that if we think of the descendants of Rachel, so many of those descendants whom we've already mentioned are known for their physicality, right? Yosef is known for his good looks, but that's what gets him in trouble or allows him to rise to prominence in Egypt, whichever perspective you want to take. But that it's his good looks that start the whole or are part of the drama. Then we move to Shaul, right? Shaul the king. He was known for his physical appearance. He was very, very, very tall, very imposing. Yehoshua as a great warrior, and so in interesting ways, that it's not just with the initial relationship with Yaakov and Rachel, but that physicality, the emphasis on the looks, on the appearance, carries forth in future generations as well. And then Rabbi Israel gave another way that these two sisters may serve as models or paradigms for something. And this is a fairly, I always hesitate to say famous, but Rav Kook gave a eulogy for Herzl when Herzl died in 1904. The lamentation of Jerusalem in Jerusalem on the death of Dr. Theodor Herzl. And this is if you've heard of it, you've heard of this because in it Rav Kook talks about Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. The Mashiach, the son of Yosef, who's going to be the first Mashiach, the temporary Mashiach, the precursor to the real Mashiach, and that's Mashiach ben Yosef. And then the ultimate Mashiach is Mashiach ben David. And so he says that Herzl, he maybe even went so far, depending on which scholar you're reading and how you understand it, but that Herzl was the potential of Mashiach ben Yosef. What's Mashiach ben Yosef? Is the restoration of a physical strength and power to the Jewish people, right? Not just physical, but right, political, worldly existence. That it was Herzl who was the founder of Zionism, who gave us that real world identity that had been lacking for all the many years and centuries of Jews living in exile without power. But then ultimately, Mashiach ben David is the descendant of the Levium and of Malchus David is with the emphasis on the spirituality. And so some critique, Rav Kook got critiqued on many fronts for many things, and this speech, this eulogy, is certainly up there with them. So first of all, that he praised Herzl. He even, again, according to some reads of it, went so far as to suggest that maybe Mashiach ben Yosef, the more physical, political, redeeming figure, was more important or was more vital in some ways. Certainly at that point in history where we survived the Galus, we survived the exile with a spiritual, right? We had, it's only by virtue of our commitment to Torah and mitzvos and to learning that we survived all the years of Galus. But what was needed was Mashiach ben Yosef, was to bring back some of this world power and strength and political acumen that was totally absent from Jewish life for thousands and thousands of years. And that's what Herzl brought back. And so it's a very interesting perspective. But again, it's tied into Mashiach ben Yosef as being the embodiment of Rachel, of the Rachel model, of something which is more based on physicality, more based on passion and raw emotions, and maybe not as enduring or long lasting, but certainly something which is vital. And then the Mashiach ben David, which is you know, for some not as exciting, not as passionate, not as based on emotions, but certainly more enduring and of more ultimate value, I think, or is how he would put it. So anyway, that's our exploration of Rachel and Leah. Are any questions or thoughts on any of this?
I was just noticing the Dvarim Chaf Aleph
Mm-hmm.
about it's the if a person gets married and he does, and then like there's the Isha Hasnua as the first wife,
Right.
right? And so I just thinking that there must be a connection there. I'm thinking with I'm sure somebody probably talks about that as how does that parallel? I like the Midrash kind of answering that, right? Because the rule is that you can't give the child of the loved one the Bechor,
Right.
which it seems like Yaakov does that when
Right.
he,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yaakov does. Right. I know one year we talked about all the mitzvot that Yaakov seems to violate, and yet
Right, yeah.
he's lauded for keeping Taryag mitzvos. Um, so yeah, Yaakov seems to violate that one also.
But
I
I like the way the Midrash seems to provide the answer of like the difference between a Gdola and a Ketana
mhm.
as right that like long lasting, right? Like so being part of Kahuna or the Malchut is a forever. But whatever is happening with Rachel is a temporary thing. So it kind of
Yeah,
balances out in the end.
yeah.
I was wondering what if anybody comments on why um, Yaakov volunteers to work for 7 years for a wife. Why was it 7 years? I mean, why not 1 or 3 or 2 or 5 or anything in
I have
between?
no I
That
have no
seems like
idea where
nobody says
seven
that.
comes
I just
from.
wonder.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean,
Because
I could make up stuff, but there seems to be.
because of his
I was gonna say, what comes to mind is that we have this Shemitah cycle where it
yeah.
seems that there is 7 years as kind of like the norm of servitude or of working for someone. But where that I don't know if I have no idea if that's true or not. I just
Because his mother seemed to imply that his self-imposed exile, running away from his brother, wouldn't be of that long a duration. She thought that it would be
right.
that the
She
cooling
thought
off period would be a lot shorter.
right. So then it's a question, right? Did she really never call for him in all the 22 years that he was gone? Or was his hand forced because he now has to stay and work off his debt to Lavan? So we don't know. But
We don't know.
there are those who say that, right, oh well, proof that Esav wasn't really just blowing off steam, but that he really meant it when he said he wants to kill Yaakov is that Rachel never tells him it's safe to come home. And if it would have been just kind of exaggeration, oh, I'm going to kill him, I can't believe he did that to me, then she would have sent for him and say, come back. She didn't.
Well, she sends Devorah. She sends Devorah eventually.
Yeah,
Devorah
right.
comes.
Well, that's I mean, we need a medrash and to make that connection.
I'll
So
make you a medrash that she was at the wedding.
it's possible. Okay. Yeah, right. So anyway, it's an interesting question, Mina. There must be something with the 7 years with the Shemitah, and I don't know. Maybe next year we'll come up with a theory, and that'll be the topic for next year's Parsha Shir.
Okay.
Okay.
I I'm finding myself fascinated with the thought that it's Leah who's buried together with Yaakov.
Yeah.
Mentioned Rachel being, she's in her own place, and that has its own significance. But that Leah that somehow gives her some status
Yeah,
that she's
definitely.
the one
Definitely. Well, I skipped over, but Rabbi Israel had he spoke about that in the podcast that I referenced, but um yeah, so it's source number 21. I'll just read it to you quickly. It is not without a strong sense of irony that the wife whose relationship with Yaakov seems so idyllic, their romantic love so evident, and who herself gave over an image of perfection, lives and dies with such a tragic sense of longing, desire, and yearning. The beautiful Rachel, who romantically appears with her sheep and who Jacob loves at first sight, remains forever expecting, awaiting fulfillment. In the words of Rav Steinzel, she is perhaps one of the most poignant expressions of the person who has everything and yet remains lacking. So, right, that there is something more ephemeral about the nature of their relationship and their connection. Yeah. All right, it's 9 o'clock. I'm going to say Lila Tov. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you,
Looking
Rabbi.
forward.
Lila
Have a
Tov.
good rest of the
Thank you.
week. And hopefully we'll see
Thank you
everyone
very
on
much.
Shabbos. And enjoy the cold.
Yeah.
I think winter finally came, right?
Yes. I think so.
All right, take care. Lila Tov.
Thank you.